The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Our guest today is award-winning illustrator of children's books, Ilse Plume. She'll be talking with Marland Schrauth, librarian at St. Alphonsus School in Brooklyn Park.
It's wonderful to welcome you to Minneapolis today, Ilse. We're glad to have you here and all your talents, and you're not a stranger to Minneapolis, so you're here showing your new book for the 1990 Christmas season, the 12 Days of Christmas. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, I'd love to talk about this book. I think, you know, an artist always gets very excited about the project they're working on at the time, and this is a book that I began actually in 1985, if you can believe it. I almost hate to admit that. And one of the things about this book is the fact that I lived in Florence 2 different times in my life, and they were very wonderful years in my life. And when I did the book, I tried to recreate a time and a place. I chose the Renaissance as the time period, and my love of Italy, you know, as sort of the reason for doing it. Mm-hmm. And people had done the 12 Days of Christmas, and I wanted a new slant on it.
It certainly is unusual, and it is beautiful. Would you like to show us maybe a page or two?
Yeah. And I'll start by just saying that one of the things that proved to be the most laborious about the book was that I decided to do it on something which, to my way of thinking, was parchment-like in appearance. And so I did each page separately, if you can imagine. I didn't just do one piece of parchment and then have it photographed 32 times. I did each meticulous little edge and each tear in the page to be individual and unique. And my reason for doing that was because I was trying to be true to that time period, and I could visualize the monks in their cells doing this. And I couldn't quite visualize this Italian monk sitting in his cell saying, well, if I do this, somebody will photograph it 32 times. I mean, that wasn't the spirit of the Renaissance. So I felt I had to be true to that. The other thing was that I was very concerned with shapes, using the Renaissance shapes in the book. And the quatrefoil, of course, was a very important shape in the Renaissance.
I see, before you turn the page, I see, though, that we have your stars and moon and your favorite things be in the background of the picture, even though it's still in the character of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about the stars in a minute. But I just wanted to show you briefly some of the other shapes that I was working with. I chose the white shape here. I don't use that much white in my actual artwork most of the time, but I was thinking of snow and snowflakes, and this was actually a mosaic tile from a church, and I just thought that made a nice visual reference and made one think of snow. And so as you can see, most of the shapes that, the diamond shape, the oval shape, all of those are true to the Renaissance and shapes that were used if you look back at the illuminated manuscripts of the time. And in the back, I'll just show you the back cover. This is kind of fun. I was, again, trying to recreate the time and the place and the monks and the cells. And this is a self-portrait, and it's, me in the cell, as it were, being the monk. My editors called me the monkette in the cell. And, I'm surrounded by sort of the Renaissance symbolism. And the Renaissance artists often depicted monsters and snakes and demons down somewhere in the artwork. And that was sort of to indicate that there was this struggle going on between all these things that were taking them away from their work. And I couldn't make it too horrible because it was a Christmas book, right? And nobody would want these ugly things on the cover, on the back cover of the book. But I thought, well, I've got the griffin and the lion, and they were sort of my monsters. And then up above was the guardian angel that was protecting, you know, whatever, the project.
The monkette.
Yeah,
doing
protecting
her
the monkette.
manuscript.
And then I've got my random stars, you know, the trademark stars in the blue.
Right.
And someone actually presented me with this quote, per aspera ad astra in Latin, which is something like through adversity to the stars. So that kind of tied in with the struggle and, you know, whatever of having this book take almost 5 years, which we won't talk about anymore.
Well, as an illustrator, though, you do work in a solitary manner. So in a
That's
way,
true.
you are like the monks that were working in their little cells, except I suppose your office is a little bigger. But
Right.
Ilse, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you came to like your drawing and do drawing? And I know you've drawn ever since you were a little child, so
Right,
maybe
right.
the students and children would be interested in hearing a little bit about that.
Okay, I think my first experience with paint was actually chewing off the paint from my crib. I had learned how to stand up, and I would kind of nibble my way around the edges.
So in a way, you absorbed it.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was back then. You didn't think about toxic things as you do now. So I mean, who knows? I could have been dead.
And you were you at that time in Dresden?
Probably, yeah. My family is of Latvian descent. As far back as I know, everybody is Latvian. And I had a very sort of tight-knit ethnic family that I grew up in. And I was really too little to go to school in Germany. I was born in Germany as my parents were escaping from Latvia. And I started school actually when we came to this country in 1950. We came to to Philadelphia. And I was always interested in art. I remember from, you know, just earliest times, past the crib, past the crib episode in the paint, I would just find pencils and, you know, start scribbling on walls and things, which made nobody very happy.
I'm sure, yeah.
And in elementary school, I, you know, was fascinated with drawing. And then I think what happened later on in elementary school was because you have to understand the time and the place, because back in the early 50s, it was not neat to be ethnic. You know, now it's kind of there's more of a cultural
mixture
kind of thing, right?
And intermingling.
Exactly, and people
exchange.
are aware of it and happy with it, and you know, think, oh, how great this is, and focus on each ethnic group. And back then, it was not, you know, really in vogue at all, and it was like you were weird if you were from some other place, and you dressed funny. And I remember having little braids. And dressing funny and having these long woolen stockings. My grandmother would make me wear these funny long stockings. And I can remember on some days on my way to school, as soon as I got around the block and I figured, Grandma can't see, I'd roll down these stockings, you know, so they'd look like other people's bobby socks. And of course I wasn't fooling anybody. And I'm sure I looked like I had little sausages around my legs or something. It was weird. But I felt like here I was fitting in, you know. But anyway, I didn't fit in, really, and I think I knew it, and probably other people knew, and I cared about it. I'm sure other people didn't care, but I cared. And so art became kind of an escape for me. It became like something I could do that other people would say, wow, she did that? You know, because I was a klutz with sports. I wasn't really great at English. I was just learning the language, so half of the time I didn't know what was going on and what people were saying, and if they were saying something about me or laughing about me or something, all the insecurities that you have as a kid. And I can remember at recess walking around the building, just totally in my own world, you know, because I didn't know what other people were thinking or saying, and they didn't really want to play with me, and I was just kind of strange with my little ethnic outfit. And part of the isolation sort of started way back then, and part of the need to do something and focus on something that I felt I could do better than other people. You know, so that's it in a capsule.
Well, that's very interesting, and it's, in a way, I mean, it's very sad, really, but in a way, it is interesting. Well, now you pursued your art,
Right.
but as you didn't do anything with a book for a long, long time. So I know that you went to art school yourself,
right.
and then you taught art. What did you do, like fine art, or what kind of art were you involved with, teaching and studying?
Right. I went to Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, and I started in 1968. I had gotten married and had a small daughter, and then decided to go back to school. And again, I sort of picked something that I knew. You know, I didn't know a whole lot about brain surgery and about metaphysics, but I thought, okay, I can do art. And so I started in evening classes, actually, because by that time I had been out of the mainstream, having gotten married so young and having a daughter, and most people my age were still hanging out being cheerleaders and, you know, going to proms and whatnot. And so I was kind of out of sync with the rest of, you know, what was going on around me. And I started back to school taking evening classes in painting. And that seemed to go well, and I got a lot of reinforcement, you know, and which was important, and my teachers thought, you know, I should continue with it. And so that was kind of how that whole thing started. But just to backtrack, when I was talking about my childhood, and you mentioned about that particular episode being sad, you know, about not fitting in. I think the reason I mention that in an interview like this, or when I talk at some of the schools to the children, it's that a lot of people forget how vulnerable kids are and how fragile their egos are, and they just assume that everyone's going to be the prom queen and everyone's the cheerleader and everyone's whatever you're supposed to be. And a lot of kids walk around with a lot of pain inside, you know. They either have families that don't fit in, or they have a defect or something that they think everybody's staring at them, and nobody, of course, is. And I think it's important to feel that you can accomplish something and be something, and also look for an outlet. Like if you're good in music, go for the music. If you're good in art, focus on the art. If you like pets, you know, think about being a veterinarian. I think that's what's important, to not you know, sit there and feel bad about whatever your deficiency is as you perceive it, but rather to, you know, do something with that part of your life and then, you know, try to make something of it.
Well, you certainly have done a good job with that. And now I suppose all those people on the playground are looking and saying, oh my. But you didn't publish your first book till about 1980,
right.
And I was wondering, then what happened? How did you get into you know, the children's book field?
Right. I think what happened was that over time, as you know, I was taking my art courses and you know, taking more different varied art lessons, I focused on what I would do after I finished school. I went into teaching. I mean, I took education courses combined with the art courses, thinking that I would eventually be a teacher. Because back in that time frame, again, things were more structured in life, and you were, you know, a nurse, or you were a teacher, or you were whatever. And I thought that I needed something to combine with my artwork so that, you know, I'd have a profession, as it were. And back in those days, you know, your parents certainly didn't think that being an artist was quite a profession, in the sense of, you know,
being a
job.
secretary or
Right, you had to do
9
something
to 5,
basic,
right,
and sensible, right? And they weren't sure. My family was never convinced that art was quite the sensible thing to be involved with. So after you know, getting my degree and my daughter was growing up, I noticed that I would be focusing a lot on children's books because I was reading them to her and looking at pictures. And the more I brought picture books home, and the more I looked at them, and the more I read them, you know, the more aware I was what was happening in the world of children's books. And I thought, you know, boy, this would be fun to do. Why couldn't I do this? You know, it's just like a little grain of an idea born in your head. And so at that time, I think I was taking some courses in the university here in Minnesota, and going to the Curlin, doing some of the lectures or hearing the lecturers speak. And I met a few people. Peter Spear was probably the most influential person in my career, because he was a man who was so humble and so wonderful. I mean, his art is just magnificent, and who had won the Caldecott, and who took the time to look at my simple little portfolio, you know, one day at the Curlin.
Your drawings.
Yeah, I was just like embarrassed to death. I thought, oh my God, he's looking at these really dumb little drawings. And, you know, he sort of said, well, I think you should try it. I think you should go for it. You know, he didn't say it in those words. He's very Dutch and very proper, and I'm sure he didn't say go for it. But, you know, something to the extent that you can do it. And I'd never had somebody really express that so vividly. You know, it was like, oh yeah, you know, we like your art and you're a good painter or whatever. But I never had somebody really say, you know, you can do it. It's not any big thing. I'm not a magical person, you know.
Well,
and I could do it,
maybe
so
you
can
don't
do
think
it.
so, but I think there are some of us that think you are a magical person.
Oh, but anyway, so that's kind of how that whole thing started. And then really on the basis of what he said, I got the notion into my head. So after he said that and I showed him these little drawings, and I said, well, what should I do? What story should I do? I had no idea. And he said, well, pick something you like, which was so sensible. He's very basic and sensible. And so I picked the Brementown Musicians, which was my first book, which kind of started the whole thing going.
The Grimm fairy tale.
Yep, this is the Grimms. Those brothers really did a lot of nice stories. And so whoops, I'm going the wrong way here. And the magical thing about this was that it was a story that I just loved a lot. And
had you heard that story when you were young?
Yeah, my grandfather told it to me for a very long time as I was sitting on his knee. I had the wonderful advantage of having a grandfather that was a real storyteller. So there were long periods of time every day where I would end up sitting on his knee and he just, you know, sort of went to town and told me all these stories, and it was great fun.
With your very first book, The Brementown Musicians, you won the Caldecott honor for that book, didn't you?
Yeah,
so everybody really liked the book. And since then, you've done not a lot, but just beautiful things since then. And maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about some of the other books that you've done.
Okay. One of the books that I really enjoyed working on was The Velveteen Rabbit, and this has now come out in another edition with Harcourt Brace Jovanovic, but this was the first the first time I did it was for David Godine in Boston, and it was this small format, which I really liked.
Child size.
Yes, very child size. And the thing that appealed to me about this particular story was that here was this little bunchy rabbit, and you know, a toy that sort of comes to life and all that kind of thing. And so that was very appealing to me. It was also the first time that somebody had suggested my doing a story, because usually I would pick, you know, something, an ethnic folk tale or a story in public domain. And here was a story that, you know, was fairly recent in terms of that. But I enjoyed working on the idea of the toys and focusing on, you know, the animals.
The rabbit maybe has influenced you a little too, along with your stars. I notice you even have star earrings.
Yes.
Your dress has stars, and you have the stars which are very prominent in all of your drawings. In every book you can find the moon, the stars, even some rabbits sometimes. You know, and, and how is that significant to you, the stars and moon?
That was a funny thing. I mean, it wasn't anything that was planned, you know. That was the fun thing about it. Again, it was something that started with the Brementown book, and I had used stars just at random, you know.
Yes,
we looked at this earlier, but it was we had used the stars at random.
And the moon.
And it seemed like something that children really liked. And of course, after I then ended up getting the Caldecott honor book, which, you know, I had no notion that would happen, it seemed like, oh, well, there was some magic in you know, the idea of the stars.
Right.
People like the stars. And from then on, it did become kind of a little, I don't know, symbol. I liked them. They're fun to draw. Can you imagine sitting there drawing all these stars? I mean, what a fun job, right?
Right.
And then people would get me things with stars. You know, my daughter got me this dress with stars and the bracelets with the stars, and people send me stars.
You use it on your envelopes when you write letters and adorn them. And yes, I notice on the Brementown Musicians, actually, just now, that you have the chicken in the same colors that you use in the Hedgehog Boy, and I think that's very interesting. Now you did this one first, of course.
Yes.
So when you went to do the Hedgehog Boy, you had this image, did you? And in your
yeah, I think, you know, people often say, well, what are ways that you identify artists? You know, is it this technique they use, the style, or do they have a character that kind of continually romps through each of their books, you know, like a sequel to
Well,
a
like
sequel.
the stars and
Right,
so forth,
right.
yes.
And I find that for me, it's I have a love of certain colors. You know, I have a certain palette, and it didn't start out consciously being that way, but that particular blue that I use on the Hedgehog Boy book and in the Bremerton was something that, you know, I've used in all my books. The earth tones that you see, especially in the Hedgehog Boy, are, you know, things that I use a lot of.
Even in your 12 Days of Christmas with the blue, that blue sky, that same tone, and the stars and the moon. And
Yeah. I find that they're colors that I respond to, so I'm hoping that other people, you know, respond to them too. This is always the hard thing, you know, when you are an artist and you're doing a book. I mean, I guess I shouldn't speak for other artists because everyone has a different way they approach life and their art. But for me, you know, I do something because I really love doing it. And when I'm doing it, you know, I'm not conscious of the audience at that time. I don't sit and think to myself, well, now, is everyone going to love this book, you know?
No.
I do something that's very meaningful to me. And for example, I remember when I did the Bremerton Musicians, I had no idea it would even become a book. I had no idea when it became a book if anybody would buy it other than my mother. You know, so you can't really gauge your, you know, sensibility that way and say, well, I'm doing this for the audience, or I'm doing this for, you know, a group of people. You're doing something that you love doing, and you somehow hope that the soul of it is out there, that people can really see what you've tried to do.
well, I think that's why you're so successful, probably, because everyone loves your books, and you've had excellent reviews on them too. Even when your was it Velveteen Rabbit came out with another illustrated version, yours was far superior and had wonderful. Well, the New York Times was raving about it in contrast to the other one. Ilse, you were the first Ezra Jack Keats Fellow at the Curlin Collection at the University. Of course, we're very proud of that. Tell us a little bit about some of the interesting things that you found there, and what, if anything, inspired you there to continue in your work.
The wonderful thing about being at the Curlin, because in a sense I, you know, always related to that because of my earlier time there and studying manuscripts and looking through people's artwork. When I had a chance to go back, actually having done a book myself, having done a couple of books, it was really like a banquet. It was like I was part of this enormous feast. You know, I could kind of go back there and go through all these 6-course meals, you know, and you know, whatever. And it was really nice to be able, you know, to step back at a different point in life and do actual research there and look at, you know, people's work whom I responded to. I can remember an interesting thing that I had done a book called Night Story with Nancy Willard. One of the things that is at the Curlin is her sort of paraphernalia, all her little early stories that she had written as a child.
Nancy Willard? Yes.
I was amazed at that. I think at some point, she's a very creative person, probably the most creative person I know. And her mind is just working on different levels and always involved with books and language and writing. And, you know, she obviously was a very creative person right from the start. So during her years, you know, she made toys. She had a son, and she made toys for him and created picture books for him. And also, you know, back to her own childhood, she had done these little books and copiously copied out the text and done drawings in the margins, you know. And all that stuff was just like a treasure trove. I had no idea it was there, first of all. And then I was just so astounded that I knew this woman, and I could kind of see what she was doing when she was 12. Yeah. You don't often have that experience,
no,
you know.
No, you certainly don't. Has she influenced your work at all, or have you absorbed some of her inspiration?
Oh yeah, her magic.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a big believer in magical things and confetti, and yeah, she just strikes me as a very surreal person. I don't think of her even as grounded. I think of her as very spiritual and just part of some wonderful tradition like William Blake and.
So you really enjoyed then working with her when you.
Oh
when you did
yeah, yeah, tremendously. I'm sort of like, in a lot of ways, I'm like a kid in a candy shop. I always so overwhelmed by people's talents and their abilities, and I'm just always so amazed. I'm always like the little kid standing there saying, wow, I get to really meet this person.
And yet we're out here saying, wow, she's done another book. It's so wonderful. And speaking of another book, you do have a book coming out in next fall, 1991,
Yes,
do you?
Yes.
You want to?
I've enjoyed working for HBJ, Harcourt Brace Ivanovich, which is the other company that I've done books for mostly, the other being Harper and Row, now HarperCollins. And I did Night Story with HBJ, and they did the new version of the Velveteen Rabbit. So this will be the third effort. And I went back to the idea of liking the Grimm's tales, of finding a new reason for doing the old stories. And I was fascinated with The Shoemaker and the Elves. That was another one of those stories my grandfather told me.
Oh, yes.
And again, I said this one in Italy. I know I've got to stop doing that or else move there. Marry an Italian and live there forever. But in the absence of that, I can kind of keep recreating Italy in my head anyway. And that one will be out fall 91.
And is that, have you done anything unusual there, or have you just put your heart and soul into it, and your love of Italy and the Italian influence, but not Italian Renaissance, I take it?
No. This was a much more modern time, unspecified time. It could be happening any time. But hopefully back a little ways.
Yeah. This is, it has been very interesting watching your books come out now since you were here as a fellow, because you really haven't changed your style that much. But now your technique, what do you use mostly to do your pictures?
Okay, that's another reason I carry my colored pencils around. There's just a couple of things in life I carry around with my luggage, and I have, you can see all this wonderful confetti back here, and I recently did a...
and your magic wand.
Yeah, my magic wand. This is actually a pencil. This is great. It hides the eraser. The star comes off, and then you've got the eraser down here.
But it is like a magic wand, because you are like a magic storyteller lady.
It's wonderful. But so I use the colored pencils, and I kind of drag them around to show the children, and my confetti, because my idea is that you shouldn't only have joyful things around on your birthday or a party. I think people spend so much of their life kind of focusing on every year there's a birthday, so somehow they have to do something very special for birthday time, bake a cake, have confetti, blow horns, or whatever you do for a birthday. And life is so short and fragile, and why should you wait around a whole year so that you can throw confetti? And I think, hey, throw confetti every day.
Right. Well, now I'm really glad that we've had this chance to visit with you, and so you could spread a little of your magic to all of us. Thank you very much, Ilse.
Thank you, Marland.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ilse Plume and Marland Schrauth, for joining us on All About Kids. And thank you for tuning in. Please join us again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency. We thank you for watching, and we hope you visit your public library often.